Hello and welcome to another edition of the High Desert Ranch and Homestead. This is Robert, and I'm going to do a little bit different approach to a video. It's part of a new series that I'm calling Robert's Food for Thought, and in this case it literally will be talking about food. And it's what I'm about to present is something that I've thought about for a very long time, and I've seen a lot of trends and things. I love to study economics, commodities, and the weather, and even a little bit of politics. Not so much the back and forth mudslinging, but overall like economic policies and things of that nature. Plus, I'm a student of history, so bear with me. It's welcome to this channel too. By the way, if you've never been on before, welcome. Please like and subscribe and share this video. If you find this information pertinent, please share it with like-minded individuals and those that maybe just look around and things just don't feel right to them. Hopefully the information that I'm going to share will be helpful for you. And as always, by the end of this presentation, I'm going to go over some things that will help you to prepare for these perfect storms. Because the trends that I've been seeing is there's always cycles in life, but in the last few years, especially in 2020, there's things that are just culminating or converging to really just set things up to occur that we've never seen before in the history of this world. Like I said, I love studying history, and I've seen the rise and fall of empires. And I will say one thing: the world, but more specifically the United States of America, we have gone where no other country or empire has gone before. And so, kind of the old phrase, the bigger they are, the harder the fall. That is so very true in this particular case. So I don't want to be doom and gloom, but anyways, I'll just present to you the evidence, and you do with it what you will. And hopefully it will open your eyes or continue to help accelerate or be a catalyst for a change and preparedness in helping to get things ordered in your life. Whether it be something huge economically or even simply the loss of a job or something like that. But just be more prepared. There's always more room for preparedness. So with that being said, let's move forward into something, one of the first sections of this presentation, and that is the drought. Per this map, you can see that things are not good for the most part of the country, and it's been a growing trend as far as things getting even more worse. As you can see here up in the high plains, and even down in Texas, and all throughout the Midwest, where there's a lot of heavy agricultural crop development and growth. Even up in Montana, a lot of wheat is grown. And I wish I had more time for this kind of stuff, but I'm going to include the links to all these maps and these resources so you can see it yourself. But I'm going to try and keep this short, 45 minutes, no more, no less, just because there is so much to cover. But so this is just a general overview. Like I say, you can see Montana, the high plains, Midwest, down to Texas, where a lot of the nation's citrus, wheat, grains, other commodities, corn is grown, cattle, livestock, especially in the Intermountain West. There's a lot of cattle. This is cattle country right here in Wyoming, and you can see this drought. Utah, some of the worst hit, Four Corners area, and even into California, Central Valley, where there's a lot of citrus and other agricultural products that are produced. And then throughout the rest of the Intermountain West, you have a lot of cattle that's run, and even in eastern Idaho too as well. Not only cattle, but a lot of potatoes and other agriculture. So these are the conditions as of March, and coming out of a winter, this is not a good sign to be seeing, specifically, especially for most of the country, but especially where a lot of the food is produced and raised. So just a little bit more of a drilling down, and I'm more focusing on the West because that's where I'm from. Depending on the response I get in the comments, I'm more than happy to do breakdown by other regions. Like I say, this is something I love to study. I've studied it my whole entire life, as far as the weather and whatnot, and agricultural, even more in the last several years. So right here is basically data compared year over year since 1981. So this is what we're looking at as of March 21st. And you can see some of these percentages. Obviously the green is really good, and then some of these colors up around the Seattle area, Northwest, and the yellow is not so great, and then you see some of these red spots down in New Mexico and even Arizona. So this is 20% of the normal snowpack. So you have some of these places down in Arizona, the White Mountains, the Salt River, and a lot of these places don't have reservoirs, or if they do, they're extremely low. And these X dots are represented by they're not being reported. So even here for like the California Central Valley, not looking great at all. Things have improved. There was those 2 massive winter storms that came through, so it's improved snowpack in places like Montana, even Wyoming, and the Front Range area. But some of the worst places that are hardest hit are still suffering greatly, such as Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and even New Mexico. Utah actually is, in fact, the worst drought levels in all 50 states of this country. So, another interesting thing that I thought was very startling, and I actually came upon this, it's even after all these years, you keep stumbling upon these things. You really have to drill deep onto some of these websites from the United States government agencies. And this one was what I thought was very startling. I do have one for the Platte River, but again, I was trying to just narrow my focus and perhaps my general audience. Like I say, I'm happy to do other, depending on the regions of where you're at and the response I receive. But here's the snow water equivalent in the Colorado headwaters. And as you can see, there's all these number of sites and all the different years. But really the one thing to look at is this green line right here. And this is actually where like the median should be out of all these years. And even like the median peak. And you can see we're coming up on that very fast. This is the first part of March. So really we're more right in here. And they release these reports bi-monthly. So hopefully those numbers have gone up because of the recent snowstorms. But even here, we can see that regardless of the snowpack or the snow melt, it's all going to be relative. And so right now is currently where we're at in 2021, and you can see we've been lagging, and especially as we start to go into these warmer summer months, things are not looking good for the Colorado River, which feeds into all these areas such as in Utah, but a majority of the water for the Colorado is allotted to places like California, parts of Nevada and Arizona, but a lot to California. And so as we start going these hot summer months, this is something to really be concerned about. I don't know if any of you have driven by Lake Powell or Lake Mead. Super low. In fact, I had my sister, she drove by Lake Powell. She sent me pictures. She's never seen it that low before. I was shocked at just how low it was. I thought it was low a few years ago, but it's not looking good, especially after 2020 was one of the worst droughts. I know in Utah and Arizona, it was the hottest and driest on record ever in like 157 years of record keeping. So it's just something to look at. So we're definitely trailing behind even just the median flow from the Colorado River. So moving into more kind of deeper the regional drought, and you're going to see how all this affects. That's why I said the perfect storm or lack thereof. It's just all these things that are just happening. Now, there's always been droughts over time, but this is some of the worst droughts we've seen in the history of the record keeping. And so you can see that the USDA or NOAA actually categorizes in 5 different categories from this yellow color all the way to this dark red, amber, burnt color to exceptional drought. And you can see just how bad it is. And again, this is it's been updated in February. There was an update in March so I wasn't able to pull up for this presentation, but things really haven't changed much. And you can see states like Utah and Arizona are some of the hardest hit, and New Mexico as well. And even up here in Wyoming, you have right here in the heart of cattle country this extreme drought. And then here's just a quick breakdown of percentages of states. So basically, in your worst categories of extreme drought and exceptional being the worst, 85% of the state of Arizona is grouped into these two categories. Colorado's 57%, New Mexico 82%. Utah is the worst out of all states, and at 90%. And Wyoming is faring a lot better, but still in these very important parts of raising cattle, where a lot of the ranchers depend on that grass to grow, and even to raise hay, they get a shot at one cut from whatever Mother Nature provides. They're at 23%, but you need to keep that in mind too. It's all relative to the area where the drought is the worst. So definitely not very encouraging, and especially as we're coming into the spring and we're coming out of this winter period, to have these kind of percentages doesn't bode well. Something that I did notice that changed is right in here in Utah, kind of the spine of the state. There's a lot of agriculture and farming and ranching communities. That actually went from exceptional drought to extreme drought. So a little bit of an improvement there, but not too much. And then again, looking down here in Arizona, you have the White Mountain Range and then the Salt River. Things haven't got worse, but they haven't got better as we're coming into the March category. And then quickly, the Beehive state breakdown. Again, focusing on what I was just talking about earlier, because I feel that quite a bit of my audience is from the state of Utah. Here's something I thought was very interesting. You can see starting 1 year ago, all the different drought conditions and their percentages. And you can see as the months have gone on, starting basically at the pandemic, start of this quote-unquote pandemic last year in March, things have just become worse ever since. And the most frightening one are some of these more extreme categories where things are just, they're not necessarily getting worse, and in some cases they are getting better, especially in this exceptional category because of all the heavy snowfall and precipitation that's fallen in this part of the state, which happens to be some of the highest agricultural outputs in the state of Utah. So again, I'll go ahead and put some links so you can look at some of these other states and see this breakdown, but that's really the nitty-gritty, just to kind of show you how bad things have become. And something that is even more interesting as part of the state of Utah's drought conditions is something that I've noticed is it went from short-term to long-term drought, which that's a hydrology problem, that it's not just a surface, that it's actually gone very deep, and it's going to take a lot to recover from this. And similar to the Colorado River headwaters, here's a soil saturation, and this green line is where we should be. This is the median over the last 40 years, and this black line is where we're at currently. So as you can see, there's a huge percent saturation difference right now, and I'll be curious to see what the next report is here in just the next few days. But if my guess is it will have improved because of all the precipitation that's the state of Utah has received, but it's still going to be a far cry from where we should be. And then just to correlate with that is the groundwater conditions. You can see the groundwater drought, which is huge as far as agricultural irrigation and wells for farmers and for small homesteads, and just a surface drought. It's you can see from January 2020 to now February, we are so much worse off than what we were from a year ago. So A Tale of Two Regions. I thought this was very interesting. A very similar thing to the state of Utah, but it's more of a regional breakdown. And I'm comparing the West, Intermountain West, and the High Plains. Again, for the sake of time, I just couldn't do a whole bunch of regions, but I'm happy to do so if needs be. You can see that 1 year ago there was over half of the West and more than 80% of the High Plains that had no sort of drought conditions. But you can see that that has now dropped to just above 12% in the High Plains and just above 10% in the West, with some of the hardest hit regions again in the Intermountain West. So some things to be a little bit troubling again as we start to go in these summer months, especially in the High Plains where there's a lot of wheat commodities grown, corn, grains, and cattle that are run, especially in Colorado and Wyoming. So something that I thought was very interesting too was these. Let me just fix that. Okay. Some reports I heard last year about rising food prices. Some experts say upwards of 400% by 2023, 2024. And while that may sound crazy, excuse me, I found this graphic and I thought it was didn't make that seem too far-fetched, this whole 400%. As you can see, these staples from they're comparing it to prices back in 2014, 2016, which I'll get into later on in this video. That was also a time of a lot of economic uncertainty, some of the outports and imports. Commodity prices, they were rather high, but as you can see, is compared to now, March 2020, compared to February of this year. Things like vegetable oils have skyrocketed, cereals, which we see for like a lot of our grains to make bread, and just food in general has gone up. Dairy, sugar is on par, but it's going to continue to trend. Meat took a hit because of the virus, and that was shutting down processing plants. So now a lot of we've seen a lot in the recent months of just people trying to get rid of their surplus stock, because the longer they hold on to those animals, whether it be cattle or pork, it continues to cost them more. So they're just trying to offload their inventory. Just an interesting graphic right here. And then this graphic by category, which I'll come back to, it's basically you're looking at the percentages of expenditures by U.S. household. And something I thought was very interesting was food was third behind housing and transportation. And as we've seen now, because of rising fuel prices and even food costs, this 13% will probably surpass transportation. If it already hasn't, I need to find a newer graphic for that. But something just to keep in mind as we go further into this presentation. And one more thing that I wanted to add to was something that, if you haven't noticed already, but in 2021 alone, and from just January to now March, is that the fuel prices have already gone up in most of the country by 35%. And for every 1 cent of price increase or price decrease in fuel costs the economy of the United States an extra $1 billion. So the fact that, like for here, example in Utah, I was paying right around $2.25 a gallon. Now it's about $3.30. That's over $1. So that's hundreds of billions of dollars that it's now cost the economy, and that is, of course, not being absorbed by the rich folk, but it's being passed upon to the average day consumer and the poorer households. So again, this whole rising food prices that was talked about in 2020, it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. So just to cover also too, speaking of storms, these recent storms that we've had, the Arctic chill that we saw in late February, early March, and then again, Xylia that came through, swept the high plains in Wyoming, Colorado. Just some of the agricultural losses that we've seen with that cold Arctic outbreak. As you can see, Texas had hundreds of millions of dollars lost in citrus, which and livestock and vegetable crops. And when you think about Texas as a supplier of agricultural products and citrus, they're huge. I mean, it's not only a big state, but they're a huge economic agricultural contributor as far as that. So to see these kind of losses, and not to even get into some of these other losses, such as Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, there was a huge hit to the crops that were planted. There's basically three growing seasons in these states. And so when the farmers planted back in November and December, and even January, they weren't expected to get hit with this record-breaking cold temperatures. And the fact that it wasn't just for a short period of time, but it was over the course of several days. I saw photos out of Louisiana that looked like where I live in Utah, and that was after several days that there was still snow on the ground. So we're talking losses in the billions of dollars as far as agriculturally. And this is just something that, again, it's compounding upon the problems that we already saw from last year. And even globally, when you look at globally, there's these, and it kind of goes right along with that earlier graphic where it shows vegetable oil prices going up. And even if you've bought an olive oil recently, you've noticed this even at places like Costco, Sam's Club, where you get good quality olive oil or vegetable oil. Those prices have gone up almost 50 to 100% in some cases. And here's why. There's because of just the changes in the climate and things like that, natural changes in climate, not man-made, that there's these viruses that are affecting these trees and these families that have extracted olive oil for generations. They're in peril of losing their entire livelihood. And so, as you can see, this could cost over 20 billion euros because of these viruses that are infecting these trees. As some have put it, it's the coronavirus of olive trees. It's really just devastating these crops, these trees that are in these countries. And it's been going on for a few years, but it's gotten even worse over the last year or so. And speaking of 2019, 2020, something that got very little coverage and yet is going to have a huge impact, and we're already seeing that impact here in 2021, is the derecho storm in places like Iowa that were completely devastated. The corn crops, they were basically doing twice as much work for half the harvest just to try and salvage what they could. And so we saw a no-plant 2019 that because of all the storms and whatnot, farmers couldn't plant till late 2019. And even then, they didn't get as much. And of course, because of that, they didn't have as much time to prepare for 2020. So when they did plant, a lot of these farmers, such as in Illinois and Iowa, they got hammered with these summer storms that just completely devastated tens of millions of acres of crops. And because of the virus, race riots, and the election, a lot of this was just kind of glazed over. And even in 2019, there wasn't a lot of talk about this no plant 2019, and yet the USDA continued to have very sunny Purdue, pun intended, gave very sunny forecasts for these agricultural outputs, and yet they weren't as rosy as he made them out to seem. And also, I put this here with China because I'm going to be talking about that. China saw flooding that they've not seen in a very long time. In fact, there was worry that a lot of these dams were going to break because of just the huge amount of not only headwater coming down from the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, but just all the torrential rain that was falling. So couple that with the lockdowns of the coronavirus in China, along with all this massive flooding. China, by the time they were able to come out of all this in 2020, they struggled to even get people back out in the field because, for many reasons, fear of the virus and other economic conditions. And so, and they're also coming out of the the African swine flu, it has also devastated the hog industry in China. And so China is trying to rebuild their hog herds, and of course, because of they've been hit so hard agriculturally because of all the drought that they had in 2019, but then the heavy rains and flooding in 2020. Um, they've not only been importing huge amounts of grain and things of corn, but they're going to be expanding even more so and buying more and more of the grains and other commodities such as corn and rice, just to be able to not only feed their population but to try and recover economically with these swine herds as they try and rebuild. And of course, that's going to drive up the price of all the worldwide commodities just because of what the efforts of China. And so, be quite interesting to see just because of the fact that places like the Soviet Union, which is the highest exporter of wheat, is putting a double tax. Putin just announced a double tax a few weeks ago on wheat, and because they're trying to control their inflation in their country, and so is these countries like Russia and then even Argentina and Brazil, they're putting limits on their exports just because of their own problems that they're having in this country. Plus, last year in South America, they had a lot of problems with the weather, which lowered the agricultural output. And so their own governments are looking to help stabilize their economy and feed their own country people in their own countries. In India, same story. In fact, there's a lot of farmers that are committing suicide because the government's restricting the exports and keeping things within the country, which means the farmers aren't even able to meet and cover their own costs of their input costs to produce whatever it is they are producing. So a lot of troubling things. I haven't heard America has not put any plans to export. We're obviously large exporters of wheat, right behind the Russians, or as I like to call them, the Soviets. To use that old term, nothing's really changed much with that country. But the fact that, and dovetails perfectly with this slide right here, is not only with the Arctic weather in late February, early March, but then it's almost as if that wasn't enough. Xylia came along, if that's how you pronounce it. The winter storm came along and dumped couple feet to 6 to 12 inches in the high plains, which, these areas get that kind of storm quite often, maybe not to that extent in one snowstorm, but the fact that what you have to understand is this winter wheat that was planted last year, it can take the dip in temperatures, especially the extremely cold temperatures, but these temperatures that we had in February and March were so cold that the wheat, as it's growing, can't handle that freeze thaw, and especially that deep freeze that we saw in February and March. And so it'll be really curious to see the wheat that the only way we'll be able to tell is just it's a wait and see game as this wheat continues to green up, just what impacts that these storms had there in the high plains of the Midwest. So again, going back to all these countries are limiting their exports or taxing it very heavily, and China, who's trying to rebuild not only their swine herds, swine, hog, pig, whatever you'd like to call them, they're trying to rebuild their herds, and they're going away from a more what has been their traditional feed to stuff like corn and wheat and some other grains, and so they're going to be buying as much as they can, and that's not just a projection. They've announced that they are making plans to do such. So again, it's just a wait and see game, but my gut tells me from what I've studied and some of the early reports coming in that the wheat isn't looking, the wheat output isn't going to be looking very good for the winter wheat here in the U.S. And speaking of corn, something that, again, has been happening for quite a few years now is this corn that's not grown for human consumption. And it's this whole ethanol madness, which I've never been a fan of. It's just government cronyism is at its worst, subsidies at its worst, just the quintessential definition of a government program that shouldn't even be around, that's just costing so much. And some things that I highlighted right here was The cultivation of corn for ethanol now requires a staggering 38 million acres of land, an area larger than the state of Illinois. So, and then I didn't underline this, but by comparison, the total of cropland used to produce grains and vegetables that humans eat is only about twice that acreage. So, in other words, the U.S. devotes enough land to corn ethanol production to feed 150 million people. So, while initially the whole idea was, oh, let's go greener and let's produce our, stop depending on foreign oil. But as you've seen in the last few years, and especially under the Trump administration, we became the number one exporter of fuel in the entire world, completely self-sufficient as far as when it came to fossil fuels, natural gas, and oil. However, with this corn, it's a mandatory thing that the government requires, and a whole bunch of gas stations, as they go to replace their equipment, have to put in this more expensive pumps so that it can pump the ethanol that's in the gasoline mixture, usually about a 10% mixture. And something else I highlighted down here was few Americans realize that to subsidize corn ethanol production, they are paying almost twice as much for ground beef as they did before this subsidy was created back in the early 2000s. And also the supermarket price of both flour and rice jumped about 50% after this was created and never fell back. That's something I realized when I first got married. And even before that, I have some siblings and family members who are very prepared. They noticed the jump, and I didn't understand why until I started looking more into the corn ethanols. And right here is exactly why. And so this ethanol program functions as a hidden food tax, the most regressive of all taxes. And isn't that the truth? And so just a staggering statistic is that $50 billion a year of taxpayer money goes to subsidize this corn ethanol, this corn that's grown not even for human consumption. And in the most recent stimulus bill, there was more subsidies given to these corn farmers and the producers of the ethanol. So it's absolute madness that as we're starting to see, we've had these shortfalls in the corn harvest in the last couple of years, and now all these other countries are going to be hunting for as much grains as they can, hence why they've tried to stop as much export from their own countries as they can. They're going to be searching for corn, and especially a place like China as well. They're going to be looking for corn not only for their hog population that they're rebuilding, but also their population in general. And now they're even announced that they're trying to get into the cattle market. Traditionally, they haven't been a large producer of cattle, but they're planning on getting into that business as well. So just something to consider, that it's just, again, another thing that just is adding to this perfect storm of chaos, whatever you want to call it. And in recent news, we've heard a lot about oil pipelines. Excuse me, gotta wet my whistle. Is that these oil pipelines not only going to have an immediate impact on oil production and the cost of oil, which, no surprise, like I said, we've seen prices already go up 35%. And who knows, we haven't even hit the summertime when generally prices really go up because there's a lot more people moving out and about. And if current trends continue with all the lockdowns easing across the nation, we're going to see quite a few people traveling, and I don't even want to know what prices are going to be. But the oil pipeline that you heard a lot about was the Keystone Pipeline that ran from Canada all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, Texas area. One that didn't get a lot of mention was the Dakota Access Pipeline, which I thought was very interesting, but it's twofold. A, it's going to obviously impact oil, but the fact that in both these cases of pipeline, it's going to be transported by rail, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Rail or truck makes absolutely no sense from an environmental perspective, but it does when you think about crony capitalism. A gentleman by the name of Warren Buffett bought out the Burlington Northern and Santa Fe rail lines several years ago, and surprise, surprise, he's the one to take the place of the oil transport. He's going to profit very much from this oil transportation deal. And it tried to happen under Obama, and it got shut down because of um, the outcry or the media attention, but nothing's being said about it now. So, but regardless, this Dakota Access Pipeline, you can see from this map where it traverses, and it travels through the high plains, Iowa and Illinois. And if you know anything about agriculture, you're looking at grains, wheat, and corn is a huge, and soybeans is a huge amount that's grown in these states. And a lot of them use rail to transport. And so agricultural economists say that shutting down the Dakota pipeline would cost corn farmers just in Iowa and Illinois alone. We're not even talking about all the other grains and wheats. Over $1 billion in annual revenue, and quote, drive up food prices for consumers as oil would now take precedence on railroads to transport grains. These railroads need to transport grains, wheat, and corn over long distances. So again, if you're looking at a bushel of corn or something of that nature, I don't know the current price right now, let's just say 150, you're going to see a huge increase because of now you can no longer put it onto some sort of hopper car or something on the railroad where they can transport, 80,000 pounds of corn, grain, or wheat at one time. You're going to have to put that on a truck. And anyone knows that when you're if you can transport by rail across land, that is the most effective and efficient means of transporting large amounts of anything. So again, it's not only going to see higher oil prices, we've already seen that, but there's a lot of farmers that are already worried that now what is that going to mean for their exports, and are they even going to be able to transport everything that they grow, or are we going to see the fact that are they going to alter their what they do plant or what they're planning on planting because of the shortage of access to railroad cars to be able to transport. So and then also too moving a little bit more to the economics on a national scale as far as fiscal policy. If any of you have got onto the United States, there's the debt calculator. It's like debtcalculator.org. Either way, I'll put it in the link below. The ticking debt time bomb, it's out of control. As you can see, over the last basically decade, it's just been steadily growing. And every other year or so, we hit these debt ceilings, and we just continue to climb higher. We hit the debt ceiling early in 2019, and it was unprecedented, 22 billion. And as you can see at the start of this virus lockdowns here in the United States, and it has gone just about 23.5 million, and it's just gone completely out of control. It's this whole modern monetary theory of just, you can just print as much money with no consequences. But it's basic economics 101 that the more money you print, the less value it's going to carry. And again, this whole who bought the extra 4.5 trillion added in 1 year, it's just incredible. And it's not China. And it's not the Fed or basically a banking cartel. It's a lot of these other countries, but a lot of other countries too are, along with China, they're decreasing their holdings as far as buying up the U.S. debt. So I think they were starting to see the writing on the wall. And when you start to see this kind of spending, eventually the market can no longer be artificially propped up. You're going to see that inflation that I believe we're already seeing with the cost of goods. It's not just simple supply and demand, although that plays into it, but you're seeing food inflation in other household goods. You're seeing, and eventually that's going to turn into hyperinflation. Hyperinflation happens overnight. We're not there yet. We're seeing that inflation increase. So all this translates into higher feed costs and other inputs. And as I kind of talked about before, China has become the largest importer of corn. And it's because of the swine flu that they lost just huge amounts. They're trying to rebuild that. And here's a statistic right here that China is going to continue to import, and to go from basically 1% to 8.3%, I believe. 2018, 2019, they were right around 3%. So they're going to more than double their amount of imports that they're going to be bringing into their country. And again, that's just going to add to the overall cost of these commodities, because the supply is not only being dwindled, and it has been dwindled over the last 2 years, 2019, 2020, but 2021 isn't looking any better. And it's simple economics. There's less, so there's the price is going to be even higher. And this translates to higher input costs for farmers, whether you're at a feedlot for your beef, or your pork industry, and even the poultry. Because of these higher input costs, farmers, ranchers, and contract suppliers of meat, they're going to be looking at ways to reduce their overall costs, which will either they're going to be purchasing less animals, whether it be steers, pigs, and even poultry. We're already actually seeing that. There's been smaller production, especially after last year. 2019 wasn't great for the livestock industry. 2020 is going to be even worse. They got hammered with the whole coronavirus, and then 2021, they're trying to rebuild from all that and even get something that's get ahead of the game. But because of these higher input costs, they're trying to look for ways to minimize all that, which would be in the form of either purchasing less animals up front, or not feeding them as much. So they're going to, as these trucks come in to pick up the cattle, the pigs, and the chickens, everything is going to weigh less. So there's going to be less amount of overall pounds hitting the market for consumers to buy. But yet the prices are either going to stay the same or even go up because of all these extra fuel costs to transport these animals from the processors, and from the processors to the to the consumers at supermarkets. So I'm running out of time. So luckily I'm at the last one of what's that, and what can you do to prepare? So I've covered a lot of information. Hopefully you found some of this useful. I'm trying not to be an alarmist, but put just the facts in front of you to let you decide what you need to do. But what can you do to prepare? Well, I would suggest to prepare like a 30-day meal plan, and then take that 30-day meal plan of things you want to eat, things you do eat, and then to create like a 3-month meal plan. And that way you can just say, okay, here's everything that needs to go in these meals for 30 days. This is what we need to buy at the grocery store, and then just multiply that by 3. Not so much related, but it's always, I think, good from what I've talked about, is to have fresh water. Do you have water barrels? Do you have water bottles with filters that can filter however many gallons? It just depends on the kind you buy. Even water bobs, your tubs are great, especially for natural disasters or if the water gets contaminated. And even just remember, if you hear something like that, shut off your main water down in your basement or whatever, so at least your water won't be contaminated with the rest. And you can at least have the water that's in your water tank, or fill up your tub and then turn off your water main. And something too is that learn to barter for your skills, trades, your skills and trade. Barter with food, even livestock that you may have. I mean, let's be honest, the dollar is just a simple bartering tool, but as you can see, and I didn't have time to get into, that's quickly going to become devalued more than it already has. So if you have a lot of cash on hand, I'm not telling you what to do, but just keep in mind, if inflation goes up, 200% the next few years, you just lost half the value of the money that you had stored under the mattress. So that definitely is going to come in handy, these skills of bartering and trading. And learn to grow your own food. Speaking of food, start a garden today. There's plenty of places. It's the perfect time of year. There's classes being offered all throughout. I'm getting emails all the time for these garden classes and that are specific to your area. There's a lot of people out there that would love to share what they know, because where I live is going to be different from where you live. And so just start a grow box, do something on the balcony. Just I mean, if you've got just a small balcony, just pack it full of pots to be able to plant food in. Just start somewhere, somehow. The good Lord will recognize that and He'll help and He'll provide. If you have an empty lot, talk to somebody about possibly turning that into a neighborhood garden. Do something. And while gardening, learn how to grow with those heirloom and open pollinated seeds. A lot of the seeds, unfortunately, they're made so that they're one and done. But we got to get back to the way our forefathers, pioneer ancestors did things. And so you'll go back to the whole the whole Punnett squares, or however you call it, of just learning how to cross-pollinate and get the best and save the best of each harvest to perpetuate into the future as far as growing more for your garden. Speaking of extra of those fuel prices going up, like I say, I've already seen a 35% increase. Buy those containers to store extra fuel. The whole buy low, fill it up, top it off while it's high, and then replenish when the price dips. Even if it's just 5, 15, 20 gallons, if you run a bigger agricultural operation, while the prices have gone up, they're going to continue to go up. So if you can fill up that 500,000 gallon tank, just keep in mind that prices have already gone up where I'm at, $1, and we could easily see another $2 to possibly even another $3 increase. I've heard reports of by summertime prices hitting $4 or $5 a gallon, especially for diesel. So if you can buy that tank of gas and fill up that $1,000 gallon or 500 gallon tank, you're going to be glad that you did if you can afford to do it versus waiting when it's going to cost triple that amount just to fill up that same tank. And consider alternative energy sources for cooking. Solar ovens, get that wood pile stocked up and dried out so you can be able to cook and even heat your home. And solar panels, I would definitely look into something like that, even if you can't provide power for your whole house. Do it for part of it just to keep those energy costs low. And especially if you can get something that's, if you need to borrow for that those solar panels, try and get a fixed rate. That way when interest rates do rise, which they are, speaking of which, that's going to be a lot better to lock in a fixed rate now than because in a year or so when the prices do go up, you're going to be grateful that you did because you're going to be saving a lot more money. And then lastly is get out of debt where possible. I love the quote of, "No man is truly free who is in financial bondage. Think what you do when you run in debt," said Benjamin Franklin. It says, "You give power to another over your liberty," and I love that. And an Old Testament passages say it. It says, Elisha said, "Pay thy debt and live." So get out of debt, especially credit card. The variable rates right now are fairly low. I mean, it's all relative, 15, 16%, but that could easily double soon, which it is. And if you can refinance, do so now. I've already noticed the rates are starting to go up. And we basically reached a point, folks, that the Federal Reserve, this private banking cartel, as I like to call them, they've ran out of tools in their toolbox. They're at a point now where they can no longer keep the rates low. They're starting to creep back up. And eventually it's going to get to the point where they're going to have to raise the interest rates just to keep because of this inflation it's just naturally starting to come into play. They're going to have to raise the rates just to help try and compensate for that, because like I say, there's nothing else that they have left to do. So definitely get those credit cards paid off. That way you don't have that debt any longer. Cut them up and then start working on any of these other things, a 3-month meal plan or a monthly meal plan, and buying extra fuel. And when you do have that monthly meal plan, that little food storage, and hopefully prices do go down, but even then, wait for them to go on sale. It's all relative. So again, it's that whole buy low and use that up while the prices are high, and then wait for prices to dip again, whether it's at a case lot sale or something of that nature. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that you've loved it. I've tried to keep it to 45. I'm coming up on the 50-minute mark, but please like and subscribe. I'll try and put out some great videos, hopefully that you can glean information from. Please share this with like-minded folks. Get the word out there. And remember, I love this picture. I took this picture here at my home, and it was just after a late spring snowstorm. We still had, and I love because after every storm comes the sun, and in this case, a beautiful rainbow. But the only way to make it through that storm is to be prepared. And I love living by that motto: if you're prepared, you shall not fear. And isn't that the truth? And so um, I appreciate you coming along for this, and that if you made it to the very end of this presentation, God bless you. And thanks for coming along, and I hope we helped you to escape the ordinary and see what it is like to live the high life here in the Intermountain West on the High Desert Ranch in Homestead.